Hello, and welcome to another episode of Faith and Freedom. I'm Garrett Kane, the Christian Libertarian. Last night, which probably won't be last night when this is issued, but at the January Chautauqua County Legislature meeting, a lot of people showed up because there was a motion that could have been potentially voted on, created, I guess, put forth in committee by freshman legislator Susan Parker, I believe representing the Dunkirk Fredonia area, if I'm not mistaken. Democratic legislator, first term in there. So she's going to kind of come out, I think, and try and make a name for herself. So this motion, which passed unanimously through the Health and Human Services Committee the week prior, could have come to the floor if it got enough signatures. And I'm going to read the motion. I'm going to read it kind of quick, but you can go online and look it up, but it's not very long. The title of it is Encouraging Best Practices to Overcome COVID-19. Whereas the residents of Chautauqua County continue to confront illness and death associated with COVID-19 pandemic, and whereas SARS-CoV-2, an easily communicable airborne respiratory virus which causes COVID-19 disease, has killed more than 800,000 Americans, including our Chautauqua County residents, and continues to infect and cause great health harm to our residents, especially those of us unvaccinated, and whereas, due to the easily communicable airborne nature of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it is known and understood that the use of masks by individuals in common indoor public areas, especially when combined with the vaccines available, helps reduce the spread of COVID-19 and its significant health consequences, including hospitalization, death. And whereas the Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services Public Health Division, referred to herein as Health Department, is a community of public health professionals whose main purpose is to protect and promote the health of our residents and families and friends, and accomplishes this mission by preventing disease, prolonging meaningful life, protecting the environment, and providing leadership in health crises. And whereas the Health Department has sought to work cooperatively with all the organizations and businesses and individuals who have an interest and stake in effectively addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, and whereas the Health Department has instituted significant efforts to encourage residents age 5 and older to be vaccinated and obtain and ensure adequate supply of vaccinations for this purpose, and whereas the Health Department has recommended that our residents aged 2 years and older wear face masks when entering common public indoor spaces, including offices and business. Therefore, let it be known the Chautauqua County Legislature lauds the efforts of the Health Department to provide a coordinated effort to address the most significant public health crisis we have faced as a county and country in more than a century. And let it be further known the Chautauqua County Legislature wholly supports the efforts of the Health Department to vaccinate county residents, including booster vaccinations as recommended, encourage the use of masks in common indoor areas, employ testing to help our residents, organizations, and businesses to help control the spread and severity of COVID-19, and let it further be known the Chautauqua County Legislature supports without reservation the Health Department's use of a single point of contact for all COVID-19 related information and assistance, including the availability of vaccines and use of masks, and employing test kits by way of Chautauqua County Health COVID-19 hotline. All right. Well, that was the motion by Legislator Parker, and a lot of people showed up to speak. A lot of people showed up to speak for this motion, and a few of them went before anybody spoke against it, because the privilege of the floor is basically just a free-for-all. Whoever steps up to the microphone first after the person prior gets to speak. Some of the comments got a little heated emotionally. I think maybe the most heated one was a woman speaking for, who had a husband who was a doctor, and she was opining of his efforts and his exhaustion with the whole situation, which I can certainly sympathize with. And I think that's one thing that we see, our healthcare system, and it's not necessarily COVID in and of itself, but I think COVID is the stressor that's making this healthcare system that we've created over the last 5-6 decades, probably more, just crumble, because it's not meant to handle stress. So I'm going to read the statement that I read up there in response to this mandate. And I've spoken up there before on COVID issues, and you guys kind of know where I come from with it, but I kind of wrapped in general healthcare policy. So what I said was as follows. Thank you to those of you who have already spoken up about this motion. I encourage those of you that are still undecided not to wrongly conflate the personnel with the policy. Myself and nearly everyone here cares for and respects the fine people we have working in our county health department. By their own admission, and you all understand that they are obligated to follow the recommendations of the New York State Department of Health and the CDC. It is lamentable that so much of what our county boils down to is just doing what we're told by the state and federal government. In other words, just following orders. So I'll stop there because I want to add a little bit, since the chairman of the legislature isn't here to call me out when I run out of time, although I'm sure my producer doesn't want me to take all day. So anyway, I spoke on this prior at the legislature, how we really just need to, as a county, lead the way of depoliticizing everything around this virus. And I believe that we could do that. It would probably come at a little bit of cost of state funding, but if it's the same amount that it costs us to do all of this crazy testing and vaccination clinics, and it's basically a break-even situation, I urge them to do it just for the sake of setting examples. So that would be, stop running these vaccination clinics and stop running the testing, especially because those services are offered in the private sector for free. Like, you can still go to CVS and they will give you the jab, and it won't cost you anything. Same with testing. You can get them in the mail now from the government, or if you have kids in school, you can go through the drive-through. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. Like, there's a shortage of tests for people who need them and want to buy them. You can't get them at CVS. So if you don't have a kid in school to get those free tests, and you're waiting for who knows how long it's going to take the government to send you the free ones in the mail. But the reason that they're not on the shelves at CVS is because the government screwed around with the supply chain through regulations of the manufacturers of the test, and because they bought up millions of them to send you in the mail 7 weeks later. So it's like, they kind of created the problem, and their solution to it is not going to be as helpful if they would have just stayed out of it, right? So that's my point. Depoliticize it. Get the government entirely out of it. So we'll get to that more as I continue to read the statement. Essentially, a yes vote on this motion is a vote of approval for top-down government control and one-size-fits-all solutions that never seem to fit our county very well at all. In fact, it doesn't fit anywhere else either. The fallout from big government dictating the COVID response has been disastrous, similar to big government directing education, economic development, national security. The list goes on. You're not voting yes in support of our local health department. You're voting in support of Albany and Washington, telling us what to do and how to spend our money. So I want to expand a little bit more on the fallout of the COVID response, which I claim has been disastrous, and I think it has been. And what I mean by that are the unintended consequences of a big centralized top-down government control versus the government staying out of it and letting the market react to this virus, and letting people both in private business, and that includes healthcare, make the best decisions and make the best policies. In that way, the response is quicker. So you know what works and you know what doesn't, and you stop doing what doesn't work and start doing more of what does. But what we have in terms of fallout from basically our economy being shut down for half a year, people lost their jobs. People had to stay home. We're not made to just be sedentary creatures. We're meant to work. If you won't work, you won't eat. That's not in the Bible because necessarily as a work ethic. That's how God designed us, right? That's what's good for our mental state and our physical state, to go out and do something to earn our living and give us a sense of accomplishment and worth. So that snowballed into higher suicide rates, higher alcoholism, higher drug abuse, which leads to poor health. Same thing. We shut down hospitals because we expected all these COVID patients. So we have a backlog of all these normal procedures that people wanted to get but couldn't because we closed our hospitals down, even hospitals that had the capacity to do elective surgeries. So now our hospitals are crowded because all these people that put off knee replacement, hysterectomies, I don't know why that came to mind, all these unessential surgeries. So, and you have a new surge of coronavirus. So that's what I mean by the fallout. So reading on here, the term best practices is in the title of the motion. Let's consider the overall system that produced these best practices. What we have in America today is a polygamous marriage of big government, which would be your big daddy, the father, the husband, I guess, big pharma, big healthcare, and big insurance, the big fat sister wives. Big government with the mountain of regulation and bureaucracy for sale to the highest bidder, along with the force of law, is what keeps this unholy union together. We see the results in the state of our healthcare system today, a system that has delivered lackluster care at exorbitant prices for decades and is currently crumbling under its own bureaucratic weight. These certainly are best practices. They're best practices to keep the power where it is and the money flowing to the corrupt politicians, big pharmacy executives, and big corporate executives. The solution is simple: a total separation of health and state, a truly free market healthcare system. And I'll settle for an incremental path, but at some point, we need to start wresting control from the cabal that's been fleecing our friends and families for decades. And it's going to require the people at the bottom, us, and you folks, you elected officials, doing the right thing, even if it comes at a cost. So I encourage you to vote no on this motion, and that's a good start, but also to examine and listen to your consciences and take more steps to get government out of healthcare. So that was it, right? So, and I know I've talked about this probably many episodes ago about the separation of health and state and how a true free market healthcare system would be better than this cabal, this unholy polygamous marriage that we have now, because the government is the head of the household, right? Just like you would have in a polygamous marriage. It's the one holding the whole thing together, and he's holding it together by force, right? But there's all this regulation, all this power that the other aspects, the sister wives in the situation can vie for and profit off of. And that's regulations like certificate of need laws. And then you have the bureaucracies under the government, the FDA, the NIH, all these big cash cows, basically, that as long as you can pay the politicians via lobby money, you got them in their pocket. They're gonna write the legislation not for the little guy, not for the person that wants to start up a small cash only surgery center like they have in Oklahoma. They're gonna favor the big corporations like Kaleida, and the big insurance corporations, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, UPMC. They're all in it together. That's why you go and you get your hospital bill and you get charged $70 for an aspirin. That aspirin doesn't cost $70. Are you kidding me? That's all just because they get to write the regulations and that therefore they get to name their price. So what would a free market healthcare system look like if we could flip a switch and turn it all into a free market system? And what would that look like in COVID, right? So say in late 2019, early 2020, we had a free market healthcare system and COVID hit the US. So what was one of the first things that actually it came to light a little later, but there was a researcher, I believe in Washington or Oregon, she realized that she could tweak the antibody test for the flu that she was using in a research lab to detect COVID. And she brought this through the proper channels and she ran up against the brick wall of the FDA. If we would have had a free market healthcare system, we would have had COVID test kits on the shelf in CVS probably around April of 2020, and they probably would have been about the same price as a home pregnancy test, and probably more accurate than they are now. But the FDA stonewalled her. They're still stonewalling a whole bunch of companies that have the technology and want to make these tests. You know why only a handful of companies can make the COVID antibody tests? Not because there's only a handful of companies in the world that can make them. There's only a handful of companies in the world that the FDA will give approval to manufacture and produce them in the US, because they want the money to go to the people that they want to get the money, right? So let's take a look at hospitals, right? If we had a free market healthcare system, you would have your choice of hospitals. They probably wouldn't be as big and as clunky as they are now. You might have some hospitals that had a policy of only hiring nurses and doctors that were fully vaccinated. And you would have hospitals that had a different policy that would hire doctors and nurses regardless of vaccination status. And you know what? And this is probably going to ruffle some feathers. You would have hospitals, or you could have hospitals, that only accepted patients that were fully vaccinated. But likewise, on the other side, you would have hospitals that didn't discriminate based on vaccination status. You know how long it would take to figure out which policy for healthcare facilities was better? Probably a couple months. You would see results, and that's the beauty of a free market system. The market responds very quickly compared to government agencies gathering research and gathering information and determining best practices, right? So best practices are a good thing. They're actually a manufacturing term. It gets thrown around a lot and misused, but the market will determine your best practices because of the laws of supply and demand. And you'll see if say, for example, and I don't think this would happen, but say, for example, that those facilities that let doctors and nurses operate without vaccines and took patients in that weren't vaccinated, if they went sideways and everybody was getting sick in those facilities and their COVID hospitalizations were through the roof versus the other one, then guess what? The market would shift in that direction, and that company would probably change their policy and be like, oh yeah, I guess that is the right science. Like I said, I think the market would shift in the other direction, but that's what you get when you don't have the government telling people you have to do it this way no matter what you do. You give the freedom of ideas or the freedom of different policies out of there, and that way something that might not be logical in the majority's mind to work might work better than what you think it would. So I know this is dragging on, and I know I've kind of beat this healthcare topic before, and I've certainly beaten the COVID topic almost to death. But hopefully it's winding down. Hopefully we can learn some lessons, and I think the lesson is that we have to get public officials, and we have to be willing as a populace to move in that direction of a separation of health and state, getting government out of our healthcare facilities and just out of the healthcare service in general, and leave it up to people, to real doctors, not political doctors, and the market. Okay, well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Faith and Freedom.